This video contains multiple stories. Let's hear story number 1. After I filed for divorce and started living happily with someone else, my ex-wife begged for me to come back. I've been married for a decade. I, 32, fell in love with my wife, now 31, back in college, and everything has been going well since then. We got married at a young age, and it truly felt like a remarkable love story. We've faced numerous challenges, yet one thing I've rarely doubted is the resilience of our connection. Things are shifting quickly now. Throughout the last year, we have uncovered issues that have significantly harmed our relationship. I survived childhood sexual abuse from multiple individuals at various ages. I kept this inside for years, leading to a lot of repressed pain that has impacted my emotional intelligence. I'm actively working on this now. I didn't mention one of the occurrences to my wife until roughly 5 or 6 years ago. Then I shared the rest of the story from about 11 months ago. I felt a deep sense of embarrassment and chose to keep it all to myself. Therapy has been incredibly helpful in helping me understand that none of this was my fault. It's frustrating that it took me so long to start therapy, but I'm doing my best. The issue stemmed from my sporadic use of adult content, which I concealed from everyone around me. Although it ought to be something personal, I also held on to it for my wife. I acted foolishly, not considering the impact it would have on others. I recently realized I had significant privacy and trust issues that I had never addressed, and I was uncomfortable discussing adult content. I was exposed to adult content at a young age, and it eventually turned into an addiction for me. Adult content was present throughout all the times I experienced abuse. I constantly resisted it, yet it would sneak back in whenever I experienced solitude in life. Adult content rarely surfaced in discussions between my wife and me, yet there was a trivial lie I told early in our relationship that was both minor and foolish. If I hadn't told that lie, I think things might have turned out differently. We might have explored her thoughts on adult content, but that conversation never took place. I've generally prided myself on being honest, but in that moment, I found myself lying for reasons that were unclear to me at the time. I felt a surge of defensiveness and fear, worried about being judged because of her beliefs. If I had the chance to rewind time, I definitely wouldn't have made that choice. But here we are. I found myself in a situation where that lie keeps resurfacing, and I've struggled to find the right moment to be honest, so I've just been dodging it instead. I ultimately decided to be honest with her for several reasons. I realized that viewing adult content might be perceived as cheating, and I could no longer keep that little lie to myself. I take full responsibility for my actions, and I deeply regret lying and deceiving her. In addition to sharing my own revelations with my wife, she opened up about a few things as well. She informed me that she nearly canceled our wedding because she still had lingering feelings for her ex. I found out I was the backup option. She held on to that for me for more than 10 years. She experienced pressure from her mother to marry me because of their religious beliefs, as they are Jehovah's Witnesses. I was aware of some aspects back then, but I had no clue that her motivation to marry me stemmed largely from fear and desperation. This has really taken a toll on me. Our bond deepened significantly following those experiences. Regrettably, circumstances shifted around 5 to 6 months back. She mentioned that she required some distance due to her pain, which was completely understandable. The issue wasn't the adult content itself, it was the dishonesty and the attempts to conceal the truth that truly caused her pain. I allowed her some distance, but that distance has expanded significantly. She keeps distancing herself from me repeatedly, and I'm at my limit. The gap is widening now that she's back in college, hitting up parties and bars, and I'm barely seeing her. She focuses on her studies, hanging out with friends, and participating in school clubs instead of making time for me or attempting to understand my love languages. While I handle work, she's busy with school. I'm also attending classes, preparing our meals, managing our home, and putting in extra effort to ensure she feels cherished, expressing her love languages. It's a lopsided connection. I've given her so much support, yet I feel like there's no love coming my way in return. It's draining, particularly since she rarely wants to discuss our issues, and I often feel manipulated. Yesterday, she revealed that she never truly felt in love with me, even though she had previously said otherwise. She has always seen me as an amazing guy and does love me, but we haven't quite reached that in-love stage. She always believed that my feelings for her were stronger than hers for me, which was true. She provided additional perspective on my status as the second choice and the challenges she encountered leading up to our wedding. I'm feeling utterly devastated. Things are not clicking, and our relationship has hit rock bottom. She has been advised to consider both individual and couples therapy. She has declined the latter, but she may have consented to the former. She acknowledges that many of these problems stem from her own experiences and insists that I'm a remarkable individual, even with my flaws. She hasn't put in any effort, and I truly deserve much better, as she's mentioned time and again. We both deserve happiness, yet this is not the way things should unfold. I'm at a loss for what to do, but it seems like divorce is on the horizon. Honestly, I'm not sure why I'm sharing this. I might be looking for some guidance here. I'm in a tough spot. Just a quick update. She was unfaithful. I feel utterly defeated. I finally filed. It's nearly a year since D-Day, and I've finally submitted my filing. I never thought I would even entertain the idea of reconciliation, but everything shifted when it happened to me. I was completely in love with my partner. I basically spent my entire childhood with her. The affair completely destroyed me. Upon discovering the truth, I was consumed by anger, trapped in a relentless cycle of rage and profound sadness. I experienced a fleeting moment of despair. The initial day turned out to be the most terrible experience I've ever had. I lost my cool, pacing the room and shouting at her like never before. I couldn't believe it. She appeared genuinely remorseful, and the individual I had cherished so profoundly for the last 12 years sat there in tears while I fell apart. I requested that the affair come to an end. She eventually agreed, but slipped back into it pretty fast, within a week or two, claiming I wasn't providing her with any love or support. We had a short conversation about divorce, and that was that. However, we cohabited for about the next 6 months, despite being apart. I was certain he was still nearby. She insists it wasn't a relationship, but she planned to move in with him after those 6 months. It simply defies logic. She has since gone to therapy, where they discussed her tendency to self-sabotage after making a mistake. She felt compelled to accept that mistake as her new reality, believing that she didn't deserve me. Those 6 months were extremely challenging for me, to the point where I found it difficult to manage even the simplest tasks. Consider filing for divorce. It may not seem overly complex, but it felt incredibly challenging for me due to the immense stress I was under. I simply aimed to keep my head above water. After she moved out, she ended things with him. In the meantime, I've spent the year focusing on rediscovering my happiness and self-love. I've had quite a bit of success and was introduced to someone through a mutual acquaintance. This girl values and cares for me. For the last month and a half, my ex has been making attempts to win me back, likely because she's noticed me being happy with someone else. I meet my ex weekly to exchange custody of my dog, and I've been upfront about dating a bit before finding an amazing girlfriend. I've also been completely honest with my new girlfriend about it all. She wished for my happiness, yet she was in pain. I had been discussing divorce for months and gradually started to fill out the paperwork. I had to complete the last steps of filing, and I managed to do it. It seems my ex never really valued our relationship, and now she's reaching out, upset, and asking for another chance. It's been incredibly difficult for me because it genuinely appears to show regret, but it's just too late now. Some might consider it misguided or illogical, but I have maintained a sense of compassion for my ex. I'm aware of her challenges and difficulties, and my only wish is for her to find happiness. The pain from her affair was something I just couldn't move beyond. Whenever I gaze at her, he seems to be lurking in the background. I'm quite proud of myself for having the courage to leave a marriage that became extremely toxic. I never asked for any of that. Yet she disregarded my boundaries and took me for granted. She was presented with numerous opportunities to halt, yet she chose not to. Now that the papers are in, she is almost pleading for me to rethink my decision. It's a heartbreaking scenario. This weekend was filled with a lot of pain. When I informed my ex about the filing, she broke down in tears, but I had to prioritize my own well-being. As someone who deeply feels for others, witnessing their suffering is truly painful for me. Despite everything challenging I've faced this past year, I feel fortunate to have met someone who truly values and cares for me. She has demonstrated numerous positive traits and approaches situations with respect and empathy. I feel thankful. I deserve happiness, and it seems I might have discovered it, but I'm proceeding with caution. That's it for story number 1. Let's hear story number 2. My entire family abandoned me and cut off all communication when they believed I wasn't my father's son. I was raised in a joyful home. My parents had a profound love for each other, and their love for my siblings and me was even greater. They showed great attentiveness and care, consistently prioritizing our needs over their own. I had a really positive relationship with my parents. My father put in long hours to support our family, yet he always found moments to be with us whenever possible. He took us on fishing trips, showed us how to play sports, and shared stories from his own childhood. My mom was the one who kept our family united. She prepared us amazing meals, assisted with our homework, and ensured that we were always tidy and presentable. I had a deep affection for my parents, and I was aware that their love for me was equally strong. Everything fell apart when my parents began to argue. I had always viewed them as the ideal couple. They had been together for as long as I could recall, and they seldom fought. However, one day, everything shifted. What began as minor disagreements quickly escalated into frequent and intense arguments. I attempted to brush them off, but they were utterly unavoidable. My parents would argue loudly for hours, and I could hear every single word from my room. One day, I overheard my dad confess to having an affair years back. My mom was furious, and in response, she confessed to having an affair of her own. The disagreement intensified to the point where my dad brought my parentage into question. I was completely taken aback. I had never even thought about the chance that he might not be my biological father. My mom was at a loss for words and just stood there, unsure of how to respond. Her gaze was filled with tears, yet the guilt and shame were unmistakable on her face. My dad abruptly left the house, and my mom hurried after him. From that moment on, nothing was the same. My siblings sided with my dad and cut off communication with me. They were furious about my parents' infidelity, but their anger intensified over the fact that my mom had been unfaithful to him, leading to doubts about whether I was actually his biological son. They showed me nothing but hostility and disdain, making me feel like an outsider in my own family. My siblings and I found ourselves trapped in the chaos of their argument, and it felt as if a bomb had gone off in our home. My parents began to treat each other with hostility, and soon their anger affected us as well. My siblings, who I had always been close to, suddenly turned against me. They held me responsible for the disintegration of our family. They claimed I was a constant reminder of my mom's affair and suggested that I might not even be my dad's biological son. Their words cut me to the core. I had always viewed our family as close, but now it felt like we were fragmented. My parents were aloof and unapproachable, while my siblings were cruel and spiteful. I attempted to engage my parents in conversation, but they were consistently preoccupied or inattentive. It felt like they were entirely wrapped up in their own issues, leaving no room for me in their lives. It felt as though I didn't even exist to them. My siblings would steer clear of me completely. They ceased inviting me to their events and completely cut off communication. It felt as though I was invisible to them. Dealing with the rejection was incredibly tough, and I found myself at a loss for how to handle it. I felt as though I had lost it all: my family, my home, and my sense of self. I felt completely adrift, uncertain if I would ever navigate my way home again. Initially, I attempted to connect with them. I reached out to my siblings through calls and texts, wanting to communicate and resolve the issues at hand. Yet, there was no response. I attempted to reach out to my parents as well, but they were constantly occupied or not home. I felt an overwhelming need to reach out to someone, anyone, who could help me understand the chaos unfolding around me. I visited my mom's house, intending to have a conversation with her. She concluded that a bit of distance was essential. However, upon seeing me, she instructed me to leave. She told me I wasn't welcome and that I needed to go. Her words cut deep, and I was in disbelief that my mother could say something like that to me. Following that, I fell into a deep depression. I was lost, unsure of my identity and my place in the world. I felt completely out of place within myself, and I was at a loss for how to change that. I ceased going to work, distanced myself from friends, and abandoned the activities I once cherished. I found myself spending the majority of my days in bed, either sleeping or simply gazing at the ceiling. I barely ate, and as a result, I shed a significant amount of weight. As the months dragged on, a whole year passed, and I began to believe I was trapped in the suffocating darkness that surrounded me. I hadn't heard from them in ages. I was right next to them, yet felt completely distant. My siblings and I spent a lot of time at our parents' house. I really missed them. I was so wrapped up in my own suffering that I failed to see how supportive my friends had been throughout it all. They would reach out, see how I was doing, and ask me to join them for various activities. Initially, I was reluctant to attend. I was fine staying in my own sadness, but eventually, I began to join them outside. We would hit the movies, grab a bite, or just chill at home. They helped me realize I wasn't isolated, and for that, I appreciated it. I began prioritizing my own well-being, looking for therapy and support groups to assist me in dealing with the hurt of being rejected by my family. I found myself leaning on my friends for support during this time, reaching out to them more than I ever had before. Initially, I felt reluctant to share the events that unfolded with my family. I felt a mix of embarrassment and shame, but over time, discussing it with friends allowed me to work through my emotions and make progress. They heard me out, providing support and reassurance. I discovered comfort in engaging in hobbies and activities that truly made me happy. I picked up the guitar again, something I had set aside when my depression took over. Playing music became a way for me to calm my spirit and express my feelings. As I began to prioritize my well-being, I observed a steady enhancement in my mental health. The weight of sadness and despair that had once enveloped me started to fade, and I found myself contemplating the future, my future. My companions were there for me every step of the way, cheering me on and providing a shoulder to lean on when things got tough. They made it clear that I wasn't alone and that there were people who loved and cared for me, despite my family's indifference. Update 1. A few years later, unexpectedly, my grandpa contacted me. He expressed that he was fed up with how my family had treated me, and he wanted to set things straight. He persuaded my father and me to take a paternity test, and even though I was hesitant at first, I eventually agreed. I was hesitant to dive back into that complicated mess, yet my curiosity about the truth was pulling me in. When the results came back positive, my family was in complete shock. They were in disbelief over their error. They came to understand their mistakes and felt regret for the hurt they had inflicted on me. They were aware of the pain they had caused me, and they were eager to find a way to fix things. I recall being conflicted about their abrupt shift in attitude. On one side, I felt a surge of happiness that my family was eager to mend our relationship. It was something I had desired for ages, and it felt like a dream realized. However, I couldn't shake off the pain and sense of betrayal that lingered from their abandonment. Even with their apologies and desperate pleas, I stayed uncertain. I was unsure if I could truly move on and let it all go. I had moved on and created a life for myself, and I was uncertain about letting my family back in. I feared that the past would come back to haunt me, leaving me wounded and isolated once more. Yet, despite my emotional turmoil, my family continued to push forward. They reached out to me, mailed letters, and my parents even appeared at my door. They pleaded for an opportunity to rectify their mistakes, assuring me they would do anything necessary to regain my trust. Their relentless pursuit left me feeling completely overwhelmed. It was evident that they felt remorse for their actions and sincerely wished to rebuild our connection. Yet, I couldn't help but sense that their attempts to connect were driven more by guilt than genuine interest. I inquired about my family's situation over the last 3 years, and my grandpa informed me that they had attended therapy and that my parents had reconciled. It was painful to realize they had moved on, as if I had never been a part of their lives. I felt excluded and unappreciated. I chose not to reconnect with them, regardless of their requests for forgiveness. I was hesitant to revisit past hurts and expose myself to that vulnerability once more. I was hesitant to put myself in a position where I could get hurt again. They let me go once, they could do it again. I informed them that they could carry on without me just as they had for all these years. It wouldn't change anything. I had finally discovered a sense of peace and happiness, and I was determined not to let anyone strip that away from me again. I discovered a new family and friends who supported me through every moment,